All right. Welcome, everyone. As people start to trickle in, I want to go ahead and get started because we have an incredible virtual gathering today. And so I want to start by saying thank you to everyone for joining us from across the country and the world. I'm Alexander McCobin, the CEO here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc., and just so appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. Today, we're joined by Catherine Allen and Ed Offterdinger to explore their new book, Conscious, Capable, and Ready to Contribute. Now, as many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism and business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to change, then improve the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement. Every week, we offer virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and business practices of those in our network. And today's gathering is going to run for about 60 minutes. Catherine and Ed will be in conversation for the first 45, and then we're going to transition to audience questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes. So if at any point you have something you want to ask Catherine or Ed, please type your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Ed is co-founder and chairman of AO People Partners, a leadership development and people strategies firm. He is the strategic advisor and leadership coach with more than 30 years of leadership and client experience as managing partner and CEO of large advisory companies. Prior to co-founding AO, Ed was the executive managing partner of the national advisory firm Baker Tilly. Ed helps CEOs and other leaders improve their performance and do what's best for their team, their business, and society. And as co-founder and chair of the Washington, D.C. chapter of Conscious Capitalism, Ed has been helping to spread the message about the power of business to do good for years. Catherine is also co-founder and the CEO of AO People Partners. She is passionately dedicated to helping leaders and organizations lean into the power of developing people to drive business success and meaningful social contribution. She brings over 25 years of experience working as an organizational and people skills development practitioner and executive coach across multiple industries. Catherine's coaching practice focuses on helping executive leaders and teams own, model, and drive business and people development in their companies. And as AO's CEO, her focus is on guiding her team to build the full suite of capabilities to help leaders reimagine and create the culture that makes investing in conscious people development more integrated and holistic. We are so proud to welcome Ed and Catherine as Conscious Capitalism Press authors with their new book, Conscious, Capable, and Ready to Contribute, a fable on how employee development can become the highest form of social contribution. And I'm just so looking forward to this conversation myself today. And Catherine, I know how long you've been working on this, and it's just so exciting to see the book come to life and finally be published. Thank you for bringing this to the world, and thank you for kicking it off and sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Alexander. And Catherine, I want to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. You know, we are really excited to talk about conscious, capable, and ready to contribute. And as Alexander said, we're really thrilled to become part of the Conscious Capitalism Press author community. Special thanks to Corey Blake and his phenomenal team at Roundtable Companies for making this a reality. So now, Catherine, you want to kick off the conversation?
I sure do, Ed. I just want to thank you all for taking your time out of your day to join us, and want to just begin by saying that the core question that we ask in our book is, what if companies made developing their employees core to their mission? We want to talk about why this is so relevant today and why it's vitally important for our future, and what's possible for business, for people, and for society. But before we jump into this question, we thought that you might like to learn a little bit about what brings us, Ed and I, to this question, and how we come to it through our careers. So Ed, why don't you start?
Sure. So as we say, sort of what's the journey that led to this question? Well, the journey started, like many things for me, with having a few great mentors early in my career. Really women and men who showed me how to lead and cared enough to point out things I needed to work on. And if they didn't know how to help me, they found somebody that did know how to help me. And some years later, the founder of the firm where I worked, where I later became CEO, brought in 2 professional development specialists to really work with the partners and employees on professional development and getting better at what we did. And one of those 2, Dave McGuire, became my coach and truly stayed with me for 20 years. I like to say, other than my wife, Donna, who I've been married to for 40, Dave was the one constant in my life all along. And he helped me grow, learn, change. I'm sad to say that he passed away in 2015, but not a day goes by, and Catherine can vouch for this because I'm always talking about him, not a day goes by that I don't think about some of the things Dave taught me and the lessons and just really all the experiences with him. But one of the things that all these experiences taught me is that development works. The firms who invest more in learning and development, training, coaches, and so forth, they're just more successful. I saw it in my clients and I saw it in the firms where I worked. People love working at those types of companies, and client satisfaction is off the charts, and they were financially successful. We became so convinced in this that we rewrote our mission statement. So I'm just going to read it to you. This goes back a number of years. We wanted to become the leading and accounting consulting firm in Washington, recognized for delivering excellence and developing leaders. Some people, including a few of my partners, thought we were nuts. Sure, development, yeah, that's a really great thing, but to put it in the published mission statement, well, you know what? It worked. So fast forward a few years, and now I'm a certified leadership coach, starting a leadership development business with Catherine, and well, I guess I'll let Catherine tell her story.
All right. So I come at this question from a 25-year career as Alexander said, an organizational and people development practitioner. So people like me are trained and specialized in what you'd say is the human communications and relational aspect of organizational life. Over the years, that's taken the form of facilitating many group strategic conversations and difficult problem-solving conversations. It's taken the form of conducting organizational assessments, mediating employee disputes, leading team building exercises, and leading leadership training and leadership coaching, of course. So throughout my career as an employee, as a team leader, as a manager, as a senior leader, and as a consultant, I've witnessed the positive and the negative impacts of people skills on employee morale, well-being, and performance. And like I'm sure all of you, I've also experienced and witnessed how workplace culture can bring out our best human qualities and reinforce our worst tendencies. I've also seen the real impacts of effective leadership and ineffective leadership. And lastly, I've listened to my share of emerging leaders who have come out of wonderful leadership development programs, inspired and motivated from what they describe as a transformational growth experience, only to become discouraged or even cynical when they don't see what they learned about leadership actually modeled by their own leaders or the leadership culture in their organization. So it's seeing these repeated challenges of non-integrated approaches to people and leadership development that has really made me want to focus on and bring a new mindset and a new blueprint for how we develop people in the workplace. So Ed, let's dive into this question of why make people development core to a company's mission?
I think where I would want to start is really kind of the beginning of the AO People Partners story, which is 2017. Catherine and I were in the early days, lots of brainstorming and visioning. And One day we were sitting on our back porch, my back porch, discussing professional development. And again, I already knew that professional development, investing in the people, was really the best way to ensure business success. By the way, if you have any doubts, I highly recommend two books, Conscious Capitalism and Firms of Endearment. And there's no doubt that development at work also really helps humans. I mean, I knew that. You know, the investments my employers made in me helped me be a better employee, but they also helped me succeed outside of work. But then Catherine started asking a few questions that really got us going, that truthfully inspired our company and inspired this book. And that started with this question: what if the ultimate benefit of all professional development is social contribution? Could employee development become the highest form of social contribution? And what if we could measure it and incentivize companies to contribute that way? Well, you know what? That afternoon and every day since, it felt like we were kind of onto a big idea. But before we get into contribution, let's talk about why development is so relevant to business today. And for that, I turn it back to you, Kath.
Okay. So, it's certainly not news to any of us that the world that we work in today is very different than it was even 10 years ago. The nature of the world that we work in requires all of us to continuously learn and adapt quickly to emerging technologies and changing job functions, a much more diverse workforce, and seamlessly endless complex situations. And the pandemic is actually a very good example of what I'm talking about. What this means, though, for all of us is that we're going to have to tap into and operate at higher levels of our cognitive or intellectual, emotional, and social intelligence to be effective and contribute in our jobs. So in a way, you can look at this as that the needs of business and the needs of people are going to be converging around human development. And they aren't just nice to have needs. These are actually imperatives that will determine whether business and people can become successful and stay successful. So Ed, let's look at what business actually is going to need more of from employees as we go forward.
I think the first thing that they need, number one, is that businesses need skilled employees, what we would call capable employees. And let's face it, we live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Or as Tom Friedman would put it, the age of accelerations. So thinking through the skills that businesses need their employees to have has to take all this change into consideration. And so one thing for sure, and we've talked a lot about this, is that all this change means that one of the most important skills needed is the ability to learn fast, to really be continuously learning. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. What else? Well, soft skills. And I saw a study recently, I think it was from Deloitte, that said in the next 10 years, 2/3 of all the jobs will be what they called soft skill intensive. And if you think about that, that makes sense. Technology is rapidly eliminating jobs that don't require the full array of human capabilities. So that makes some sense. However, as Catherine and I talked about it, the term soft skills, we think, is a misnomer. There's really nothing soft or easy about learning these skills. And, the other thing is that term, it kind of implies soft skills, that somehow they're less important than hard skills, whatever hard skills are. So Catherine's going to cover this further in a few minutes. But for now, I guess what I'd like the audience to start thinking about is move soft skills over here and replace mind with that with mind skills and people skills, which we'll talk a little bit more about. My last point about what businesses need from employees today, and it's something, gosh, I think I've done like 8 talks about recently, is what do they need the most right now? They need their employees to stay longer. They need them to be fully engaged in work. They need their employees to really care about why the company's work matters. Keep in mind that the cost of turnover ranges, depending on whose study you're looking at, between 50% and 200% of that employee's annual compensation. That's the cost of losing that person. So again, I'm a business guy at heart. It starts with if you get more to stay, obviously there's a payoff. But Catherine, that's the business side. What do the employees need from business today?
Okay, well, so let's look at what employees are looking for from business. If you just put aside compensation and benefits, which of course are very important for employees, there are two things, areas that employees are really needing and looking for from their employers. The first is quality learning and development opportunities. Employees today are keenly aware that they have to own their development, personal and professional, but they're also, going to be choosing who to work for and how long to stay based on the quality of the learning and career development opportunities they can experience at a company. The second thing that employees look for is really for all of us, regardless of our generation. We want to work in organizational cultures where we feel accepted and included and can bring our authentic self to work. We want to feel safe to challenge ourselves and be challenged by others to learn and grow. And we just want to feel that we work in an organization where we have a clear sense of purpose and that what we do actually makes a meaningful contribution. But, if we do look at a difference in the generations, the generation that's coming into the workforce, that will be the predominant workforce in less than a decade, they demand this kind of working culture, and they're not afraid to say so. But what we all have to appreciate is that we are all going to have to bring these higher degrees of skills and abilities to create that kind of culture, because it just doesn't happen by itself. Everyone has to bring their best abilities to really contribute to that kind of culture that we all want to be a part of. So there are three big implications that for business from these converging imperatives that we want to share. The first is that we are going to have to embrace an expanded view of the purpose of a modern business. If we all agree that developing people capabilities will be a lifelong requirement of working adults and the organizations that employ them, then perhaps it's time to expand the purpose of modern organizations from a singular focus on delivering value to people through products and services, to also include contributing to the development and potential of working adults. So if that implication is true, then the second implication is that organizations are going to have to get better at developing capabilities, skills and capabilities. We are not going to be able to hire our way to a fully skilled workforce. We are going to have to really develop employees as a part of their daily environment. And we're going to have to start earlier developing the foundational people and leadership skills that every employee is actually going to need. So if that second implication is true, the third implication is that organizations are going to have to be designed to actually support a more holistic and integrated approach to people development. People skills, mind skills, soft skills, these are the abilities that actually we develop in the course of doing our daily work. And so we're going to have a much more integrated way for all employees to be mindful and conscientious about how they are developing these skills and utilizing them. But those are the imperatives, and they feel a bit heavy, I think. But there is really this opportunity that Ed alluded to at the beginning that we don't talk much about. And that's what I'd like, Ed, you to really share a bit more about this idea of what if we looked at people development as a form of social contribution.
Thanks, Catherine. That's certainly when we got fired up sitting on the back porch when we started thinking about that. And so people development at work as a form of social contribution. All right, we believe that's a powerful vision for conscious leaders, conscious businesses, and conscious capitalism in totality. If we look at those imperatives that Catherine was talking about, from a more conscious perspective, the way a conscious leader might look at a conscious business, a bigger opportunity and vision for modern businesses does emerge. An opportunity to really contribute more conscious, mature, and capable adults who are able to really do stuff out there making this world better. Okay, a logical question then is how? How will they contribute to our world, their world? Well, a few thoughts, very high level to start. You could say that companies who invest in developing their people, they contribute to society because one, they grow faster than the competition, and that means they create more jobs, which we know elevates humanity. Two, these kind of companies, they foster what we would call a spirit of stewardship, which, honestly, we know employees don't always stay forever. So if they leave with that spirit of stewardship, they go out into the world and they create and they generate and they contribute. The third way to think about it is that employees who learn those skills, the truth is it makes them better at work and it makes them better at home. We'll come back to that a little later, some examples. And then fourth, we just sort of our catchphrase on it, and it's not, we didn't dream it up, we heard it, but is that, they contribute their time and their talent and their treasure to the communities in which they live. Okay, well, great. When our employers invest in our development, so what we would think of as a kind of a holistic type of development, then our eyes are opened, our understanding, we can tap into those social and emotional abilities that Catherine was talking about. And what does that really mean? We'll give you a couple of examples. So they communicate more effectively. They work well with others. They respect differences. They face and they solve problems. They feel empathy for others people's circumstances, and they challenge and support each other. Look, if you stop and think about it for a second, those capabilities certainly help at work, but we suggest that those capabilities really carry over to the world away from work. Imagine, let me go through a couple of those again. Those capabilities like working well with others, respecting differences, feeling empathy. Well, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds like a pretty good friend, a pretty good parent, a pretty good spouse, a great civic leader, heck, a pretty good mayor, pretty good governor, probably a pretty good president. So, but is that really business's responsibility? You might be asking yourself. Okay, on one level, with this group in particular, that's a pretty easy answer if you accept the fundamental premise of conscious capitalism, which is that business exists to elevate humanity, to be a force for good. Conscious capitalists have long known that when you create great cultures, then people win. But so do other stakeholders, including the shareholders. Okay, keep thinking. Can business be the place where all that development happens? Well, Catherine and I would say unequivocally, big all caps, yes, you got it. Okay, easy for us to say, why do we think that? Well, first off, where do we spend more time than just about any place other than maybe sleeping? In the workplace. And in the workplace, if you think about it, that's where adults get the best opportunities for learning. After they leave university, college, high school, whatever, work is where we get those kind of learning opportunities the most. It's where we really learn leadership capabilities. And remember, business guy, businesses win when we have fully capable employees. A few more thoughts, and then I'll turn it back to Catherine. All right. When I think about my life, who I am as a person, I can really see where the experiences that I've described have had a major impact on forming the human that I am. I can think of mentors who've taught me some life skills. Gosh, I remember Betty back in the 80s when I was woe is me, whining about something, and she said, misery is optional. Look, Ed, pain is inevitable, misery is optional. I learned that at work. I live it. I try to live it every day outside of work. Or my good boss, Bob, one of my managing partners back in the day, who showed me what carefrontation was. Yeah, he probably never heard of that either. But it was basically happened when he looked at me and said in no uncertain terms that my presentation skills were not good. That's actually not what he said, but that's all I can do for a mixed audience. And then he had me in an intensive public speaking program with coaching inside of 2 weeks. He confronted me, but he helped me. He did something. Or my coach, Dave. There's just too many life lessons to enumerate in a short meeting like this. So I'll move on. But if I would suggest, if you reflect, if you think about yourselves, I bet you'll pretty quickly see that businesses can be rich sources of development of life skills. And so for us, life skills allow us to contribute to the world around us. Our goal, Catherine and mine, is to call attention to this fact and help businesses and leaders consciously build the practices needed to make that happen. Okay, Catherine, you're up. Can you tell the audience why we wrote a book?
Yeah, so I will build on that, because I think what Ed is saying is that we wanted to make what many of us see as implicit value in developing people in the workplace. We wanted to make it a more explicit articulation that it's time to see that developing people and equipping them with the capabilities they need to flourish in the 21st century is not only key to business success, it's actually what can make the most positive difference in our world. We believe it's the highest contribution an organization can make to society. And it's the best way for conscious businesses to contribute to elevating humanity. We also wanted to share a vision where the conscious practice of people development in the workplace becomes a recognized and incentivized form of social contribution of 21st century organizations. Imagine that. Imagine that. No matter the industry, we believe every business can be a more conscious source of contributing more capable people. So that's the inspiration we wanted to impart in the book. We also know that contributing to capable people requires a lot of practical considerations. And so we wanted to share with leaders some of the practical things they can begin to do to lay the foundation to create the environment that enables them to help develop more capable people. So Ed, our book is a little bit different. It's not a typical business book. We hoped that we could inspire you, and so tell everybody how we wrote the book.
Sure. Well, we considered, I would say, several different formats for the book before landing on pairing fiction with a very thorough, practical how-to. Look, we are huge fans of business books, many of which convey business lessons through well-researched examples, and they're great. In fact, anybody that's one of my coaching clients that's on here knows I'm frequently rolling back and forth here at my desk, grabbing books, and we love them. In fact, we make reference to many of those great authors in our story. Dan Pink, Bill George, Keegan and Leahy, Amy Edmondson, and of course, John Mackey and Raj Sisodia. So we love those. But the truth is, I've always wanted to write fiction. And the Fable how-to genre, well, let's just say that's been pretty successful over the years as well. You can think of Five Dysfunctions of the Team and books like that. So when Catherine suggested it, I jumped on it. And so that's what Conscious, Capable, and Ready to Contribute is. It's a fable about a leader and a company that are in trouble. A good guy with a good company that lost his way a bit. And then things got really bad. Andrew Hyde and his co-founder, Pat Carter's consulting company, Shift Advisors, is in big trouble. People are leaving in droves. A competitor is stealing clients and people. His financial investor is threatening to pull out. Board chair has to resign. His partners are angry. His wife is sick and tired of his self-absorption. Let's just say Andrew is not having a good week. So I don't really want to reveal, how things end exactly. And I imagine and hope you'll enjoy the twists and turns and ups and downs. But what I can say is this, that the things begin to change for the good when Andrew proposes a new higher purpose for Shift advisors. And that higher purpose was this: consciously develop our people's capabilities so they can contribute. You can just imagine how his financial investor reacted to that. So that was a fun conversation. But along the way, Andrew and Pat, and their team discover and go all in on conscious capitalism. They learn that they need to lean into their own development. They work with a coach who I would describe as sort of one part Yoda and one part Bill Campbell from $1 Trillion Coach. They see things like what happens when they practice intentional rather than random acts of kindness. They experience an attack from a charismatic, camera-ready competitor and work their way through COVID-19, social unrest, and political turmoil. But through it all, and they go through a lot, they learn how to build a culture where people truly contribute to society, what they and what we call a conscious development culture. As I hope you can tell, I had a lot of fun writing it, and I hope you really will enjoy reading it as well. Now, Catherine did a fantastic job writing the blueprint, the how to shift from Shift Advisors. In it, she gives very practical suggestions on how you can build a conscious development culture. So Catherine, you ready to share some of those pearls of wisdom that are in the back?
Absolutely. And I'll say that I believe, I know that these pearls of wisdom are being utilized by other people with lots of wisdom as well today, which is very exciting. Before I just do a brief overview of what we have in the how-to section of the book, I want to really acknowledge the role that technology is playing in learning and development. It has revolutionized the way we access learning content and is enabling all kinds of collaborative learning experiences. So it's very important. It's going to be with us from here on out, and it's very exciting. But investing in technology alone cannot create the culture a business needs to deliver the full potential of employee learning and development. So a more fundamental investment is needed to create these conditions for both people and organizations, by the way, to learn and develop, because organizations are living systems in themselves, and they too have to be in a developmental mode. So the job, though, of building this culture is what we call, as Ed said, a conscious development culture. Now, admittedly, there are other ways of describing this kind of culture. It's referred to as a deliberately developmental culture by Keegan and Leahy, or an intentional learning culture. Whatever way you want to describe the culture of learning and development in your organization, what's important is that you create a culture that enables all of your employees to see everyone and everything as a source of learning and growth every day. That's really the point of what we're trying to create, organizations are trying to create in a development culture. But we recognize that creating this kind of culture actually requires a lot of practical approaches. They have to be practical, they have to be effective, and they have to be sustainable if they're going to really be effective in promoting this way of working in an effective way. So we outlined 5 strategies that we believe, through our experience, through our research, and our work with clients, are very helpful to leaders in laying the foundation that creates a more conscious development culture. And so the 5 strategies that you can read obviously more about in the book, but outlined briefly, are: number 1, understanding the role of leadership. The reality is, and we all know that leaders enable everything that works and doesn't work in an organizational environment. And that includes development. And so it's really important that leaders understand that they have to, what we say, own, model, and drive the development agenda in their organization. Leaders have to own their own developmental journey because they need to be able to model it so employees know, you see the cues and the permissions to step in to their own development journey. And then leaders have to really drive the mindset and the practices that reinforce this throughout their organization. So leadership is really important. And we provide in the book some questions that really will help leaders, whether it's individually or as part of a team, really explore what their role is in driving the development culture successfully. The second strategy is aligning business and people's strategies. It's really important to make explicit how development supports business objectives and outcomes. You'd be surprised at how often we don't actually link the development programs and strategies of our employees to the actual business objectives. And employees really need to understand why development is valued in the business, why it's relevant, why it's expected for everyone to practice, and what the incentives are. So aligning more closely development to the business strategy itself is really important. Third, define development culture principles. This is really important for creating the clarity for all employees to understand the commitment and the expectations that come with really being able to operate in a conscious development culture. In the book, we describe some examples of principles. We invite and encourage you to think of your own principles that you would want to coexist with your core values in your company. But an example of a principle would be making learning and growth safe, psychologically safe. Challenging, but safe. It's a very important underlying principle that is very key to making a development culture, which is oftentimes messy and hard, safe for everyone to participate in. The fourth strategy is what we say, identify core people capabilities. Now, Ed alluded to this earlier. We think that we have got to start to make more explicit and more comfortable talking about capabilities and skills. It can't be something that we just kind of relegate over to HR and learning and development, or the individual's own learning experience that they do by themselves. We've really got to start to use the language of skills and capabilities much more comfortably in our day-to-day work activities. But one practical area that we need to address is this whole huge universal bucket of soft skills, which are every human skill that is not technical. So think about that. What soft skills are we talking about? And employees have to have the practicality of understanding the skills and capabilities a company values, why they're relevant, expected, and incentivized. And so we've taken a stab through our own experience and a lot of research into making soft skills a bit more approachable. And so we have created two buckets for soft skills. The first is mind skills. These are the cognitive brain-based functions that are associated with the way we learn, the way we solve problems, the way we organize, the way we make decisions. There are 7 of them, and we define them in the book. Then there's people skills. These are the behavioral and interpersonal skills and abilities that we need to know ourselves well, to be able to communicate and relate well with others in the way we work every day. So we put in the chat box a PDF of these skills that we believe are foundational, because we believe that we've got to create some more foundational smaller grouping of skills and capabilities that every employee needs to know about, needs to be learning about, and in the practice over the course of their careers, developing. These are also very foundational for leadership skills. And as I said, we've got to really start to develop leadership capabilities earlier in employees' careers. So we believe that this is a first step that helps to make this idea of soft skills a bit more comprehensible for both employers and employees. So the fifth strategy is really about embedding messages and the mindset and the practices of people development in the employee experience. And a roadmap that every business has available to them today that they use every day is the employee life cycle. And so what we have imagined is that, and it's up on the screen for you, wanted to show you, we wanted to create an image, a roadmap that would help employers, and employees understand the way they can embed these messages, mindsets, and practices and reinforce them in the employee's experience, every employee's experience. So you can see here that it's development centric. We have, the individual at the center of the life cycle. Its purpose is to reinforce the development culture. In our book, we go through and define messages, mindsets, practices that you can utilize and reinforce and leverage in every aspect of an employee and every element of an employee's experience. All of these support an employee's experience in your organization, of course. So we go into some detail with some ideas. Some of them you will be doing yourself, which is great, and others may be things that you can begin to implement. What I want to just draw your attention to are ways that we have reimagined the life cycle a bit as it's leveraged for development. As you see at the top, we've included strategy at the top. A development culture is fundamentally a strategic business decision that leaders have to really be involved in the strategy of. And so we include this to really underscore the importance of starting with leaders creating and being involved in creating the strategy that supports the employee's experience in their organization from a developmental standpoint. So of course, you've got attraction and recruitment and onboarding, and we talk about how important in specific ways that you can leverage development in those. But I want to draw your attention to capability development and performance management and how they are connected with an infinity loop. We wanted to emphasize the importance today, and it's becoming more important for many organizations, to better integrate capability development activities. Those are all of the resources that employees can experience in an organization around development, from their individual development plan to all of the content, programs, group activities, individual activities, online activities, etc. But we believe it's really important to integrate what employees are learning into performance management. And that is the performance management plan. That is the conversations that managers have with employees, that peers have with each other. But it's really important to begin to define ways that your company can better integrate what employees are learning and developing in terms of their abilities into the way they incorporate those into their work. So retention is very important, and there are various strategies that engage, that measure engagement. And one of the great things about development is that it is inherently engaging. It is virtually impossible to be in a quality learning and development environment in your organization and not feel engaged. And so it's a real wonderful aspect of development that organizations really want to explore and take more advantage of. But I want to point you to the upper left where we have social contribution, that arrow up there. We want to remind everyone, employees and employers alike, that if you are consciously focused on developing your employees, then whether they're staying or they choose to leave, which eventually they will, either voluntarily or involuntarily, as the case may be, it's important to be mindful that this effort is really contributing to everyone's development of their full capabilities. Ed and I have a mantra that we use often that really captures what the purpose of developing people is all about. And so, Ed, why don't you share that?
Sure. And this, Alexander, this will be the last thing, our close before the Q&A. And so that's your little cue there. So this is actually at the top of the first page of the how-to section. I'm just going to read it to you. Build it so they will want to come, flourish, and stay, knowing that someday they may leave. Thus, it is imperative to define what you want them to say about their growth experience with your organization and what you want the outside world to say about how you invest and contribute capable people to society. On behalf of Catherine, I just want to say thanks for everybody for dialing in. We're got 10, 15 minutes for some Q&A. And Alexander, thank you very much.
Catherine, Ed, thank you for that amazing conversation already. And we've got questions rolling in. So I want to start by sharing Kyle's question. Catherine, you spoke about how important it is for the organization's leadership to buy into the value and own their own development. Do you have any advice as to how one would effectively be able to identify that commitment prior to joining an organization? And have you had multiple experiences where words are spoken, but actions don't follow? Or I'm sorry, I think Kyle's had those experiences before. And so curious how you, and you as well, Ed, would answer that.
Well, I think it's a great question, Kyle. And as I said at the beginning, I have experienced personally and certainly have heard many leaders who share just your experience, where sometimes what we learn and what we actually experience in organizational life don't always match up. And it's not that people intend that to happen, it's just that it's not a very conscious practice. We talk about development as being a practice, and leadership is a really good example of a responsibility in organization that actually takes practice. And so we think of leadership, and a lot of this in the leadership development field really look at leadership as a daily practice. And practice is how we develop, it's how we grow. And so what I would say is that it's really up to each leader, and the sooner you learn this, the better. But I cannot overemphasize how everyone in an organization looks at leaders for the cues and the permission to step into what it feels like to be learning. Because you have to think of, being in an organization is like being in a sandbox where we're all, we all are trying to make our way with our egos and our insecurities and things that we don't know. And in an organizational environment, that learning process is messy and it feels intimidating. And so we really require leaders to show us how to do that, because leaders give us permission and give us cues about what is acceptable. And so I would really encourage you to think about, how you want to show up and what's important to you to show and demonstrate how you develop yourself and how you really own that and how you talk about it.
So if I could just add a couple of quick things on the recruiting point of it, which is great, because actually oftentimes we ask the question in the other direction. How are we going to find that out about the candidate? So I would encourage you to ask 3 or 4 questions. Do you believe in 360s? Do you believe in upward feedback? Do you have a coach? So I would ask questions like that when you're talking to, the CEOs ready to hire you. I always love it when people say, well, what are you working on, Ed? I like that question a lot. What do you read? would be a good question. It'll tell you a lot about things. And ultimately, when you're taking on a high-end position, I'd say, hey, that's great. Can I talk to your team? You may still end up working for someone who's really good at telling you one thing, but making it, not actually living it. But I would use those as good questions too, Kyle. What else, Alexander? I almost called you Andrew there for a minute.
That would have been fine, but thank you for that. We have more questions coming in. Mike is curious if self-awareness, like being aware of one's own reality filters, for example, the ladder of inference, and things like self-limiting beliefs, are included in your mind skills bucket.
They sure
Catherine.
are.
Yes.
Yeah, they sure are. So self-awareness is really, the anchoring in emotional intelligence or IQ. So, it's how do I know myself? How do I manage myself? And so it is very fundamental. We call it like a core competency in people skills. So it's very important. And, it's really, if you think about it, we don't always talk about these terms in the course of our workday. And if we aren't talking about it and making these skills and what they mean and what they look like and how we show up with them and how we use them, it's hard for us in a work setting to really be engaged in them and support each other as peers in the way they show up. And so, yes, emotional intelligence and self-awareness is fundamental people skill.
Yeah, I want to just say two quick things on that. One is that, we've got them. We think of EQ as in the people skills side of things, not mind skills. But also, I'm smiling because one of my favorite phrases with coaching clients is, self-awareness is just the first step. Self-control is really important, which of course is one of the 5 features of EQ. So I'd say that, yeah, absolutely on the list. And then there's some that we think maybe are a little different that not everybody thinks of, as core skills, like kindness, as you could tell from my allusion earlier. So great question.
So I want to backtrack for a moment, actually, because Ed, you mentioned in answering the last question that you often are trying to figure out if candidates for being an employee are focused on their own development. And I'm curious if you two could share what you typically recommend employers to look for in employees with that, what the indicators are.
Yeah, I'll take that one first, Kath. First thing I want to be clear, what I was implying is that the questions that I typically ask, I think the candidates should be asking as well. But you've actually kind of stumbled into a kind of a big aha that is more really illuminated in Catherine's how-to section, which is that we want to build those kind of questions into the recruiting process, the development types of questions. And when everybody, whether you're hiring, whatever level, when you're asking the types of questions that are about development, that's part of how you embed and you end up with a development culture. So I literally have asked everybody that I have interviewed. I learned this from Dave McGuire, by the way. Everybody that I've ever interviewed, and that's probably, it's got to be more than 1,000 people at this point, going back when I started doing this. I ask every one of them, what do you read? And the truth is, I don't actually care what the answer is. Other than, if nothing, that might be a problem for me. But what that does is it opens up a conversation about their learning interest and their curiosity, which is one of our skills. And so that is one I search for in everybody, is this some sort of intellectual curiosity. That would be an example. And I want to know what they think about the idea of working on themselves. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to ask prior employers, have you been involved in some sort of coaching or 360 process? Again, there's lots of good ones out there. We happen to love the leadership circle. We use it, but when people go, no, that's not the end of the world for me, but then I need to come up with another way to find out how are they working on themselves? Because we want people to join and help us form cultures that are about learning and development.
What I would also add, because we work with companies to help them better embed the questions about a leader or an individual's sense of how they learn and grow into the interviewing process. It's very important to also be communicating to prospective employees what's expected, what's supported around the learning and development culture in the organization. You really want to be attracting and selecting employees that understand and embrace a growth mindset, for example, because you want them to be able to really adjust and adapt and contribute to a learning culture. And so you really want to be selecting as best you can. Also knowing that everyone is learning throughout their life, and so it helps candidates understand and really, start that process as they're coming into an organization very open and ready to be challenged, to grow. That part of being an employee of a company is learning and growing, and that's part of how you look at performance itself. And so it reinforces the recruiting process comes before the onboarding process. And how does the onboarding process support and set them up for being really open to the learning on a daily basis and helping each other learn on a daily basis? And so it's all mutually reinforcing. And we all need that reinforcement, because learning, we don't retain a lot of things we learn. We have to keep reinforcing concepts and skills. And so that's really kind of the building environment that you want to create every day.
Fantastic. Thank you. Katie has a question and is wondering how to specifically compensate or incentivize leaders to support their employees on their learning journey.
It's a really good question. And I think that it I almost want to answer it with a definition of consciousness. I won't do that, but I hope you get the point. Intentional. I mean, I think back to some of the best compensation systems I've seen for owners and partners in professional services firms is where, in fact, one of the buckets of compensation was about growth. It was literally, we wanted to be a place that was what we call the partner-making partner organization. Another Dave McGuire special, by the way, where people are rewarded for that process. That's not the only reason you do it. But I think if some people don't, they just do it because it's the right thing to do. Other people need incentives. So I think that these systems can be built, and it's not terribly complicated. It does take courage. It takes a leader who's willing to say, hey, this is important, and we're going to reward it. But I applaud the question, because I think that more and more companies can do it and should do it.
I would just quickly add, because I know we're running out of time, it's a wonderful question, and it's a very central question for leaders. This is why we spend a lot of time with executive leadership teams to really help them explore and understand leadership, the developmental process that everyone is on, that they are on. Because when you are a part of an organization and you have together really been able to explore these questions around the importance of development, that it helps to create buy-in. So that's one form of incentivizing, being a part of leading. The other thing that leaders discover, and we watch them discover this, they often at the senior levels do not spend time developing people or in developmental conversations because they're busy, working on the business, right? But when they slow down to have these conversations, mentoring conversations, intentional development conversations, their first reaction is, oh my God, this takes a lot of time. But then they discover how valuable the time is spent and how much it produces in terms of engagement with leaders and real improvements in performance. And so they also discover the meaningfulness. And they've described how meaningful these conversations are. And so there's intrinsic incentives as well as performance, as Ed says, making it a part of compensation and outcomes and supporting the culture. Both of those, you need both of those really to do a great job.
Ed, Catherine, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're at the top of the hour and so don't have any more time. We want to respect your time and just so appreciate you taking an hour to share your insights, to launch your book with Conscious Capitalism, and for everything that you're doing to elevate humanity through business.
We thank you all.
Thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Alex.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
It has been, and I want to thank everyone else who's participating for joining us today. In the chat box, there is a quick survey. It'll take 30 seconds. We would love for you to fill out to help us plan future programming. And if you're new to Conscious Capitalism, please visit our website, consciouscapitalism.org/start-here for more information about our movement and organization and how to get more involved. With that, I hope you all have a great day and look forward to seeing you on our next virtual gathering.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.